Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. Michael valued the security in his life, including his financial work, peaceful family meals, and weekend rituals with his wife, Sophia. For more than 17 years, they had established a pattern focused around their daughter Emily that seemed comfortable and unchanging. When Emily departed for university, Michael felt their developing estrangement was a normal result of an empty nest. Unbeknownst to him, Sophia perceived their stability as stagnation. While Michael found solace in regularity, Sophia became restless, looking for excitement and satisfaction outside of their home. What Michael saw as a phase was, for Sophia, the beginning of a gradual disintegration. Michael Peters was exposed to an event that no spouse should have. He accidentally overheard two guys speaking openly about his wife in a vivid and very explicit way. They weren't making generic observations, instead, they were giving concrete parallels of their own interactions with her. The crude descriptions bore little relation to the lady he had been married to for 19 years, much less the mother of his kid. Michael first struggled to connect their blunt tales with the life he had with his wife. The event happened at a pub where Michael had gathered with his co-workers to celebrate the conclusion of another grueling week. A clear glass partition separated him from the guys, covering their faces but not their words, which pierced through the background hum. Their reckless loudness suggested inebriation, but it did not lessen the force of their remarks, which penetrated Michael's reality, leaving a raw wound of incredulity and worry. Initially, Michael struggled to relate the discourse to his personal experiences. By the time he began analyzing their comments, a significant amount of their conversation had already passed him. What remained in his recollection was disjointed, a patchwork of sentences pieced together from the pieces he caught after finally paying attention. It wasn't until one of them uttered a name that his concentration improved. Peters, the lady from one of them, stated it with smugness and intoxicated certainty. Hearing his name attached to such derogatory remarks stunned Michael like a physical blow. It jolted him out of his easy apathy. Indeed, his wife Sophia worked in finance at a well-known business, which the guys mentioned seconds later. That tidbit alone made him pay closer attention. However, the terms they used to describe her were so unlike the Sophia he knew and loved that he couldn't instantly reconcile their talk with his wife. Despite his denial, something about their statements lingered in his thoughts, nagging at him and instilling doubt. Their claims seemed too particular to ignore fully. Restless and uncomfortable, he immediately leaned closer to hear more, but it seemed that the talk was already over. One guy burped loudly, while the other mumbled something about leaving and peeing in the corner. Michael got a glimpse of one man's departing form as he left the pub. The person was heavy-set and had a bald patch on his head. Michael had no clue who the other guy may have been. The bar was packed with people, making it hard to recognize him. Sophia was not there when Michael came home around 40 minutes later. Another 40 minutes passed and there was still no sign of her. He wondered whether his views would have been different if he hadn't overheard the annoying chat before. Perhaps their statements created a seed of skepticism. It seemed ludicrous. Sophia deserved to relax as much as he did. She didn't have to follow a timetable to know when it was time to come home. Still, she could have phoned, she normally did when her plans extended late into the evening. That's when he discovered she'd been doing this more often lately, coming home late and failing to call. These incidents had been accumulating for months, if not a year, prior to today. After another hour passed, Michael decided to dial her mobile phone. It went directly to voicemail. He dialed her office number, but the janitor answered and said everyone had departed hours before. Sophia burst through the front door a few moments later. Michael considered what explanation he would use this time. Traffic. A flat tire. Maybe he could handle a wait, but 2 hours with no explanation. Could it have been unexpected overtime? Possible but improbable on a Thursday evening. Furthermore, the office janitor had made it plain that the premises was unoccupied. Could she have just lost track of time with her friends? Maybe, but Sophia had never gone this late without leaving a brief note. She made no excuses as she entered. In reality, she said nothing except a casual hi. Without hesitation, she dashed upstairs to take a shower, an unusual practice for her after returning home. She looked revived when she returned, her complexion shined, her moist hair framed her face, and she was dressed in a neat white shirt and linen skirt. She grabbed an apron and instructed Michael to set the table while she cooked supper. He did not answer, and she gradually realized. After putting a casserole in the oven and starting to cut vegetables for a salad, she turned to him. "Is something wrong?" she inquired, cleaning her hands. Michael beheld her eyes for the first time that evening. "Maybe I should be asking you," he said. She gazed back, perplexed. "Asking me what?" "I was worried you were late." "You didn't call," he said. Sophia frowned slightly as she looked at the clock. "Oh my, I didn't realize it was so late," she said, covering her mouth with one hand. She stepped up and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm sorry, honey, I lost track of time." Her blue eyes fixed on his, expressing an apologetic expression. Michael carefully took her hands away from his neck and put them between them. "Let's eat," he murmured, shrugging off the situation. "I'm starving." Later that night, they tried to make love, but it was uncomfortable and disjointed. Michael struggled to be present, and Sophia appeared distant in a new manner. It was disastrous for both of them. The following morning, they had a peaceful breakfast. Michael had a muffin, while Sophia chose porridge and fruit. They weren't great breakfast eaters, but the tension was apparent. Sophia, still in her robe, drank her coffee while Michael, dressed for a run, kept a wary watch on her. Finally, he ended the stillness. "Will talking help?" he inquired. She gazed at him for a long time. "What exactly do you need help with?" she inquired. "I think you're cheating on me," he said plainly. "I think you're seeing someone else." Sophia's expression did not alter. She did not flinch, blink, or fidget. She only gazed at him, her expression inscrutable. Michael's cheeks burned red with humiliation and rage. "Why?" Michael managed to ask. "Why, Sophia?" "Why, Michael?" she repeated. Her voice was quiet yet harsh. Her look altered to one of scorn. "Why would you think him cheating on you?" Michael felt the impact of her words. She never addressed him by name unless she was outraged, irritated, or serious. Normally, it was simply honey. Now her tone was almost incredulous. "Why accuse me, Michael?" she screamed, her voice raised. Michael lifted his hand and motioned for her to drop hers. He described the overheard remarks at the bar, her tardiness, the absence of a phone call, and her unusual behavior, the bathing, the lack of tenderness during their attempt at intimacy. He fumbled over his remarks, embarrassed by his own uncertainties and the difficulty of expressing them. He hated blaming her, yet the idea seemed inescapable. Sophia pulled her chair back and got up, pulling her robe closely about her. "I don't have to listen to this," she muttered before exiting the kitchen. Michael sat still, wondering whether to follow her. Was it cowardice, indecision, or fear? No, he understood it wasn't one of them. He remained in his seat because, deep down, he thought he already knew the answer. Sophia had always been aggressive, almost inviting debates when she felt mistreated, but now she had walked away, ending the conversation completely. He believed the quiet told him all he needed to know. She did not fight back or attempt to protect herself. She walked away, leaving the dispute unsolved. Sophia wasn't like that, and Michael understood why. She had no defense. Because he was correct. Sophia had been unfaithful. When Sophia went to the grocery shop, she walked into an unusually silent home. It did not take her off guard. She had anticipated it. She had purposefully bought less items, avoiding the customary cans of beer and most of the meat she would regularly purchase. Michael was gone. She was confident of it, and the vacant home proved her forecast. A folded letter was on the kitchen counter. She read it quickly, her face expressionless, then crumpled it and dumped it in the garbage. The kettle on the stove started to whistle, shattering the stillness. Sophia poured hot water over a tea bag and took her cup outside to the terrace, where the late afternoon light warmed her. She drank her tea and looked about the yard. Did she sense regret? She thought she may miss Michael in certain ways. They were comfortable together because of their common routines and lengthy history. But she also felt somewhat relieved. The reality was, she had been preparing for this moment for more than 2 years. Sophia seldom paused to consider how she had managed to cheat on Michael so easily and with so little shame. She assumed everything boiled down to a lack of respect. He didn't order it, therefore she didn't provide it. Michael, in her opinion, had become a shadow of what a man should be. In comparison to others, she met guys who were forceful and authoritative. Michael felt like a stopgap. He was too courteous, always deferring to her. Sophia found what other women consider love and commitment to be oppressive and uninteresting. Then there was Nathan Green. Nathan personified everything Michael was not. He was tall, confident, and ambitious. He had joined her firm 6 months before. Nathan radiated an enthusiasm that pulled Sophia in right away. They had quickly become lovers. Michael's revelation of her affair did not surprise her. If anything, it was astonishing that it had taken so long. His obliviousness seemed like one more insult, another example of his indifference. Sophia's hookups began 2 years ago, just after their daughter Emily departed for college. They began as ephemeral flirtations that quickly grew, but they have lately become more purposeful. She had embraced the freedom of her newfound impulses, engaging in a succession of partnerships with younger, more handsome men. Surprisingly, finding interested partners was simple. Sophia realized she was still gorgeous. She worked hard to keep her appearance. A large portion of her salary was spent on her looks, which included a carefully picked clothing, high-end lingerie, professional hairstyling, and immaculate cosmetics. Michael never objected to the costs. Never appeared to notice. She questioned if he regarded her as anything other than his wife of 40 years. However, the young guys she encountered saw her as something quite else. They were captivated to her confidence and appeal, and Sophia relished the attention. Her life suddenly seemed far apart from the boring lifestyle she had spent with Michael. She had been clear with herself from the beginning: if Michael ever discovered her adultery, she would not struggle to maintain the marriage. She would accept a divorce and go without hesitation. But she also decided not to be careless. She avoided taking chances that may reveal her, never carried her belongings into their house, and always made believable justifications for her absence. She even made careful not to make love to Michael on the same day she was with another guy. She saw this as a little concession to him, evidence that she was not completely uncaring. Her adventures have grown over the last year. She had slept with co-workers, clients, and even participated in group experiences. These encounters were more than simply exciting, they bolstered her confidence and even helped her profession. A recent promotion and a big bonus, she thought, were indirect rewards for her bravery. But suddenly everything was different. The excitement of sneaking about had faded, replaced with a feeling of annoyance. Secrets were onerous rather than exciting. Of course, there was Nathan. Nathan was more than simply another flirtation. Had completely charmed her. Was it love? Sophia was unsure. She knew she couldn't stop thinking about him. He filled her thoughts and fantasies, making her feel more alive than she had in years. Nathan was not gentle. He was tough, demanding, and unrepentant, and she wanted every moment of it. When he asked her to start a life with him, she didn't hesitate to picture what it might be like. Sophia had spent hours with Nathan at a hotel on Thursday afternoon, while 2 of her work pals gossiped loudly in a bar at her suggestion. She purposefully remained out late, skipping the normal check-in call with Michael. When she returned home, she made no excuses and barely acknowledged her husband before going for a lengthy shower. The shower was planned as a minor hint to raise his suspicions. That night, she even commenced lovemaking, certain that he would detect the tiny signals of her treachery. Sophia had had enough of the deception. Michael's confrontation and subsequent departure did not disturb her. If anything, it reinforced what she already knew. Her future no longer depended on him. Her life with Nathan awaited her, unexpected, passionate, and vibrant. The sensation of shame that washed over her was fleeting, but its sheer existence bothered her. Sophia was taken aback the following morning after breakfast when Michael addressed her openly and asked whether she had been unfaithful. The words stopped in her throat. She planned this time, but when it occurred, she couldn't bring herself to confess. Instead, she let quiet speak for her. Was it her lingering feelings for Michael that kept her back? Shame. She giggled to herself, surprised. Maybe I still care for him, she reflected, somewhat pleased by the idea. It wasn't love in the romantic sense, but rather a calm, distant fondness, a link that had become thin over the years, weakened by habit and time. They had been married for more than 19 years, their bond strengthened by shared challenges, a house they had created together, and the memories that came with it. However, most of those linkages had already loosened, leaving just a few frail strands. The most powerful of them was Emily, their daughter, the lively, intellectual evidence that their love had once been genuine. Emily was the reason she still cared for Michael. Sophia sighed and took a drink of her tea, contemplating the matter. Was she really meant to repress her impulses, her deep, irrefutable craving for passion, since Michael no longer satisfied her? Because he had become too predictable or dull? It seemed silly to criticize herself for wanting more. Denying her wants would only result in bitterness, making her a bitter, prematurely aged lady. What good would that do? Life is transient, she reasoned. To neglect its joys would be the ultimate sin. Her phone buzzed, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was Nathan. Her heart raced just hearing his voice. He told her the day before that she was fantastic, better than anybody he had ever been with. Younger ladies couldn't compete, he claimed. The remembrance made her grin, and she confirmed their next meeting. He would make his first visit to her home tonight. It seemed daring, yet the idea delighted her. Life was lovely. With a cheeky smile, she walked the stairs to test on a new silk costume. Her steps were light and her attitude upbeat. Meanwhile, Michael was contemplating on how little he genuinely understood his wife. That discovery, he believed, was the most devastating blow of all. It was as if the whole base of his existence had been taken away, leaving only shards of memories and illusions. He pondered how he had missed the indications, how he hadn't seen Sophia moving away from him over the last year. He attributed it to the empty nest, Emily's departure for university, and Sophia's focus on her full-time work. But now it was evident that he had been blind. Michael thought how he had conducted his life. Like many males, he was constantly thinking about the future, about initiatives, objectives, and difficulties. His thoughts had been absorbed with what was ahead, not the present. He had trusted Sophia to be there for him, taking care of the now while he planned for the future. It was both naive and comfortable. He had thought he was secure. He realized how little time he had spent really studying Sophia and understanding her wants and aspirations. He believed that women were more present than males. They integrated their lives into the present, forging deep connections between family, friends, and communities. Men, on the other hand, were preoccupied with their own objectives, completely unaware of the web that was being created about them. They didn't notice until they were caught, like he is now. Michael's mind drifted as he sat alone in a cheap hotel a few miles from home. Had left the home early that morning, tossing a bag in the vehicle and driven aimlessly till he arrived. Unable to sit still, he decided to go on a trek, something he hadn't done in years. Sophia had never shared his love of the outdoors. She preferred beaches and shopping malls, but climbing had always been his means of escaping and finding clarity. As he went through the woods, memories of his younger self returned. Had been adventurous back then, exploring trails and rafting rivers. Meeting Sophia has altered everything. She had been out of his league, a vivacious social tornado in contrast to his quiet, serious manner. She was stunning and full of life, and he was absolutely charmed. He had no idea why she had chosen him, but he never questioned it. He just soaked in her passion, feeling as if he had been delivered from a barren life. In those early years, their bond seemed unbreakable. They had overcome obstacles together, finding delight in even the simplest of things. Then there came Emily, the miracle. Her delivery had been tricky, and although Sophia's life was not in danger, it meant they couldn't have any more children. Sophia's hysterectomy was a difficult but necessary choice. As Michael walked, he couldn't help but wonder whether their relationship had just run its course. Had it been doomed from the beginning? A mismatch that only time will reveal. Or had he failed to nurture it, too preoccupied with his own diversions to see Sophia fading away? Whatever the answer, he knew one thing for certain: the life they'd shared was over, and there was no turning back. Was loyalty indicative of love? Michael pondered as he walked across the dunes, the grainy sand crunching under his feet and the tall grasses whispering in the breeze. Years when Sophia was obliged to have a hysterectomy following Emily's birth, he had no hesitation. He shared her fate and had a vasectomy. At the moment, it looked like the pinnacle of solidarity, a silent proclamation of their common destiny. He couldn't remember if she had appreciated the gesture. Her comments have lately wounded. What if you meet someone else and want kids? She had questioned last year, her tone harsh with skepticism. He had shrugged it off, assuming she was kidding. But now her inquiry was gnawing at him. The wind, harsh and persistent, started to remove the fog in his head. He noticed how much of his recent history had faded into confused obscurity. He had become used to the numbness and had not even felt it. As he sat on a fallen tree trunk overlooking the valley, it dawned on him, certain forms of love are unhealthy. They sneak into your psyche, eroding your confidence, blinding you to the flaws in your partner's devotion, and silently persuading you to surrender aspects of yourself. For the first time in years, he noticed the vivid green of the trees, the brilliant blue of a newly washed sky, and the glitter of sunlight on a meandering stream. The beauty was nearly overwhelming, like discovering a planet he had forgotten existed. The anguish arrived next, fresh and unfiltered. He reflected on how, for years, he had smoothed the rough edges of reality to avoid addressing the truth about Sophia. It was as if he had applied a detective film coating on his life, a Vaseline blur across the lens of his marriage. But now, sitting alone on that tree, the curtain had gone. Ripped away to reveal the harsh, merciless reality. His shoulders trembled and muffled tears escaped him. He was devastated by more than Sophia's treachery. It was the knowledge of how deeply he had violated himself. Sorting through the rubble of their life together seemed impossible at that moment, the memories, the love, the anguish. They all spilled out in a confused flood. But while he sat there, he started going through everything piece by piece. Among the rubble, there was one unmistakable gem, Emily. Whatever else shattered, she was his anchor. The evidence of what was once wonderful between him and Sophia. The sun was beginning to set, producing long shadows with its golden light. Michael stood stiffly, his legs complaining, and started a sluggish trek back to his accommodation. He had a telephone call to make. Amanda Collins hesitated briefly as she shook out her beautiful nails. The rich burgundy tint shined in the mellow light of the bedroom. She handled her phone delicately, taking care not to mar the beautiful sheen. Emily's voice, small and anxious, emerged from the speaker. Dad has just phoned. He stated he'd left you, Mom. What's happening? Rachel grumbled internally, frustration rising to the surface before she wiped it away. Did Michael really need to inform Emily now? Honey, don't worry, she murmured, her tone gentle and steady. We'll discuss it tomorrow, okay? This is not something to discuss over the phone. Why haven't you told me? Emily pushed. What happened? Rachel looked at the clock. Ryan would arrive any minute, and she wasn't even dressed. Darling, there's nothing to worry about. Just grown-up things between your father and myself. Let's meet tomorrow, all right? Noon at that little cafe near the gym. There was a long gap on the line, but Rachel did not wait for Emily's response. I really need to leave now, sweetheart. She hung up, returning the phone on the vanity as she rose and slipped into her burgundy heels. The shoes gave her legs an additional 4 inches, making them seem longer. As she viewed herself in the full-length mirror, tucking her shirt into her skirt, she enjoyed how the fabric clung to her form. Her lips formed a contented grin. You're stunning, she said to her mirror, just as the doorbell rang. The following day, Michael sat across from Emily at a tiny, private Italian restaurant. Her huge, inquiring eyes never left his face. You look tired, she murmured quietly, her worry clear. Michael offered her a tiny, tired grin. It's good to see you, sweetheart, he replied, reaching out to take her hand. After the waitress served their beverages and bread, Emily finally addressed him the question he had been dreading. What happened, Dad? What is going on with Mom? Michael swirled the wine in his glass, watching the red liquid reflect the candlelight. He took a breath. Your mother doesn't need me anymore, he said calmly. Emily's cry broke through the pleasant ambience. What do you mean? What are you saying? Michael put his hand over hers. Sweetheart, when your mother and I met, it was magical. She really took me off my feet with her enthusiasm and attractiveness. We were in deep love. You were the greatest gift of love. If you ever need confirmation of how much we cared about each other, simply look in the mirror. You are the best of us. Emily's eyes welled with tears as she listened. Michael's voice faltered as he spoke. Things change, honey. Your mother eventually stopped liking me as much as she always did. I didn't see it at first, or maybe I didn't want to, but now I do. Emily seemed shocked, her hands shaking. Dad, he shook his head softly. Do not blame yourself. This is not about you. It's about your mother and I and how we let each other slip away. He held her hand. But I will always love you. That will never change. The stillness that followed was profound, yet it was also full of understanding. Michael felt some calm for the first time. Emily was his clarity, his link to what had once been genuine and lovely, and that, at the very least, was worth hanging on to. Michael stopped, looking down at the table before seeing Emily's tearful eyes. She started shaking her head, her blonde hair falling over her face as if to physically filter off what she was hearing. He softly raised his hand to pacify her. Sweetheart, listen, he said, his voice firm but sorrowful. I believe I fell short of your mother's expectations over time. Perhaps she wanted someone stronger, more powerful, more ambitious, capable of lighting up a room and commanding attention. But it has never been who I am. I believed she liked me for being myself, for being consistent. A tiny, sad grin appeared on his lips. He looked aside, lost in contemplation for a time. I gave her exactly what I thought she wanted. I tried hard to ensure her comfort and stability. But maybe I didn't truly give her what she needed. Emily gazed at him, her uncertainty obvious, her eyes asking for clarification. He pressed on, his sentences surprisingly quiet, as if he had practiced them in his thoughts. The reality is, honey, time changes everything. It wears you down gently but mercilessly. It not only dulls your enthusiasm, but it also causes you to lose sight of what was once important to you. Sometimes you wake up one day and realize you've let something valuable slip away. Please, Daddy, Emily said quietly, her voice shaking. He stretched across the table and squeezed her hand. I apologize. I should not trouble you with this. But I want you to know that this doesn't imply I didn't love her. I loved her profoundly and I loved you with all my heart. That love made each hard day at work worthwhile. But, in retrospect, maybe I didn't convey it in the most effective manner for her. Emily's fingers squeezed around his when the appetizers came. She nibbled at her salad, her appetite fading. Michael moved the antipasti about his plate without taking a bite. Your mother and I saw life differently, he said after a long silence. I immersed myself in work and the delight of creating and constructing. I figured that was plenty for both of us. However, I do not believe that was the case with her. When you grew up and departed for university, she was left alone with her time and no one to occupy it with. I didn't realize how terrible it was for her. Emily's cheeks became pale. He paused, reluctant to say too much, but he had already gotten this far. After you went, she began to change. She worked more, dressed differently, and spent more time at the gym. I assumed that was her natural reaction to having an empty nest. I wanted to assist her. But, looking back, I see she was looking for something else. Something I was not providing her. Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. It wasn't all work, was it? Michael breathed softly, as if releasing a weight had been carrying for too long. No, honey. I don't believe it was. Initially, she may have persuaded herself that it was about her profession or independence. But it gradually grew into much more. Proof, I suppose. Proof that she was still vibrant, noticed, and desirable. Emily gazed down at her plate, tears flowing softly. Have you spoken to her about it? She inquired after a minute. Michael shakes his head. We didn't. We drifted. We lived side by side but not together. I did not inquire, and she did not make an offer. I thought she seemed joyful. I was quite busy. Always busy. Emily's eyes sought his, hoping for a positive outcome. Maybe this is just a phase. Maybe she will regret it, Dad. He smiled sadly and shook his head. No, honey. I do not think so. This is not just about other males. It is about her seeking affirmation in a manner that I cannot provide. I don't believe she will quit. And I don't believe she wants to. You have to talk to her, Emily replied, her voice cracking. I will, if it matters to you, he said, his tone lacking conviction. Emily's voice cracked as she continued, Daddy. This is really unfair. It's quite sad. Michael nodded, his own anguish mirrored in his daughter's expression. It is, sweetheart. But we can't alter it right now. All we can do is move forward. The waitress came with their pastas and removed the hardly eaten appetizers. Emily took up her fork, despite the fact that the chat had taken away her hunger. Michael leaned forwards, his voice soft. Eat, honey. You need your strength. Emily nodded, her hands quivering slightly as she swirled noodles on her fork. As they ate in quiet, the weight of the moment lingered between them, unsaid yet understood. Michael found bittersweet solace in knowing that, even as his marriage collapsed, his relationship with his daughter remained solid. Amanda Collins sat in a shadowy corner of the balcony, her moist hair framing her lovely face. The shine was neither caused by the gym equipment she had just used, nor was it simply due to the UV session she had participated in. It was the effect of her luxury cream, which she paid a high price for to keep her young appearance. At her age, she knew better than to expose herself to the scorching sun. Her workout habit had begun decades ago, when Emily was born. Rachel had been determined to lose the weight she had gained throughout her pregnancy. She had no regrets about switching from 3 days a week to every other day in recent years. The result was obvious: the way younger guys flirted with her, the admiring look she noticed in mirrors, the ease with which she slid into outfits she'd worn in her 20s. Even here, surrounded by toned bodies, Rachel believed she could hold her own. She didn't require surgery, her solid figure and naturally flawless skin outperformed her competitors' frozen Botox masks. Rachel sipped her fruit drink, smiling quietly. Her world seemed perfect, until it didn't. Emily emerged across the patio, gracefully moving between tables. The likeness was strong. The golden, sunny hair bounced freely. Her skin radiated unadulterated energy, her blue eyes twinkled with purity, and her motions were free of artifice. Emily didn't strive to enchant anybody, she just lived, and that was enough. Rachel had a stinging aching in her chest. Envy, although she refused to call it that. She rose to meet her daughter and leaned in for a kiss that never landed, her lips touching just the air. Pleasantries were first, followed by quick updates and a second round of juice, but soon a calm tension spread over the table. Emily, who was usually alert, detected a lack of warmth in her mother's small talk, a boredom she had never experienced before. Something had altered. Rachel's father's remarks had placed her in a new light, bringing her out of the shadows. Emily saw no longer the mother she had idealized, but a complicated, imperfect human devoid of the unconditional love that had previously blinded her judgment. Emily firmly laid down her glass. Mom, you know why I am here. What's happening? Rachel paused, her eyelids fluttering as if buying time. Oh, honey, it's awful, but this happens all the time, doesn't it? Her voice was gentle and practiced. Your father and I have grown apart. This is simply one of those things. I always thought we'd grow old together, but she groaned and reached for Emily's hand. It was not meant to be. Please know that we both adore you. That will never change. Emily looked at her, shocked. The words seemed empty, as if they had been pulled from a screenplay. She couldn't believe her mother expected her to accept such clichés. Emily interjected, waving her hand dismissively, and spoke sharply. Come on, Mom. Emily. Your daughter is nearly as brilliant as you. Cut the act. Rachel blinked, her polished demeanor faltering for a moment. Was there a blush behind her perfectly put makeup? She sighed again, but with less conviction. I apologize, sweetie. You're correct. I have been horrible. I don't know how to explain this. Try the truth, Emily said, astonished by her own audacity. She'd never talked to her mother like this before, but Rachel's masquerade left her with no option. Rachel moved in her expensive chair, her manicured nails tapping on the glass. A flash of displeasure crossed her features, but vanished just as soon. Emily, this is between your father and myself. We have changed, that is all. People grow apart. Please don't make this more difficult than it has to be. Emily was infuriated by the flippant dismissal. Is that it? Is this all you have to say? She demanded, her voice filled with rage. She had not anticipated to feel this way. Rachel shut her eyes momentarily, her lips twitching. It's for the best, dear. Believe me. Before Emily could react, a voice rang out from the terrace entrance. Rachel pivoted, her body hardening. A tall, well-groomed guy with golden hair approached, full of confidence. He seemed to be in his mid-30s. Rachel stood uneasily, her gaze shifting between Emily and the guy as he approached their table. For the first time in years, Rachel seemed uncertain of herself. The guy diffused the tension by pulling Rachel into an embrace. His lips went close to hers, but she drew away at the last second, allowing his kiss to fall on her cheek. Nathan, she murmured with a trembling voice. This is my daughter Emily. Emily, meet Nathan. We work together. Emily's piercing eyes darted between her mother and Nathan, absorbing every detail. Her thoughts raced as she attempted to comprehend what she was experiencing. Whatever it was, it went much beyond work. Emily smiled sweetly as she shook Nathan's hand, bearing his silky praises with false courtesy. She observed everything about him, including the fresh white polo stretched over his wide chest, the nicely fitted pants, and the golden sunburn on his arms. He even had the arrogance to say that she and Rachel might pass as sisters. Then he leaned down close to Rachel and whispered something just out of hearing. Rachel's hesitant nod and subtle attempt to separate herself from him further added to the uneasiness. Nathan chuckled enthusiastically, saying "See you, honey," and walked back to the door, where two of his friends were waiting. As they went inside, there was a surge of laughing. Emily shifted her gaze to her mother, her jaw hardening. "Do you sleep with him, Mom?" she asked frankly, her tone low but piercing. Rachel froze, the color draining from her cheeks and being replaced by a flush of wrath. "Why are you speaking to me like way, Emily?" she snapped. "I am your mother. I don't have to answer such a question." Emily did not flinch. "Aren't you? It is evident. How long has it been going on? Has Dad found out?" Rachel's voice soared an octave. "You are mistaken. You don't know what you're talking about. Nathan and I work together. We are pals. That is it. Friends. Can a mom make friends without being criticized by her self-righteous daughter?" Her scream attracted attention from surrounding tables, but Emily remained composed. She moved her chair back gently, its legs scraping across the stone patio. "Friends, huh? Is that truly all you have to say?" Rachel halted her frenzied movements, clutching her handbag securely in her hands. Her voice hardened. "I don't owe you any explanations, Emily." Emily stood with a frigid face. "Fine. Don't bother phoning me unless you're willing to be honest. Preferably using the truth." Rachel gasped and reached out to stop her. "No, Emily. Do not listen to your father. He's turning you against me. You do not understand." Emily paused mid-stride, casting a wary glance over her shoulder. "Do you mean Dad? God, you don't know him at all. Have you ever? You are pitiful, Mom. Enjoy yourself." Emily walked away silently, her golden locks bouncing with each step. Rachel remained still, grasping her handbag so hard that her knuckles became white. "Screw you, Michael," she said under her breath. "Screw you." Michael slept well for the first time in what seemed like years. The weight of previous events had lifted somewhat, giving way to the type of clarity that inspired action. It wasn't only the trek or our meal with Emily. It was the concept building in his mind, a fantastic plan that reintroduced enthusiasm and purpose into his existence. Yesterday, he contacted James, an old acquaintance he hadn't seen in months. Guilt pulled at him for phoning unexpectedly, but James had been courteous. After all, isn't it the purpose of enduring friendships? They had known each other since elementary school, and their friendship had endured years of separation. When James left for college, they reunited when he returned to begin a psychology practice, and their families became close until Rachel unexpectedly severed relations 2 years ago. She never provided a clear explanation, leaving Michael uncomfortable and perplexed. According to what he understood, James' wife Linda had felt the same way, and the connection between the two families had ended without explanation. Despite Rachel's urging that he keep his distance, Michael had maintained his connection with James, slipping in the odd game of pool or a pint at the bar. Last night, he spilled everything, Rachel's adultery, the moment he found it, and her frigid response when challenged. He spoke of the emptiness he'd been experiencing, the dark cloud that had crept over his life for years without his knowledge. James listened closely, his face turning from worry to dread as Michael hesitated. James startled him with an apology, not as a friend but as a psychotherapist. "I should have seen it," James said, guilty in his tone. "You've been exhibiting typical symptoms of depression for years. I should have noticed." The remarks struck Michael hard, but they also sounded true. James emphasized that Michael's retreat, fixation with work, and separation from the outside world were all signs. Even Michael's predisposition to blame himself for Rachel's misery contributed to the sickness. James noted how depression sneaks in gradually, frequently going undetected by those closest to the sufferer. As long as you did your job, no one noticed. Emily was too preoccupied with her own life to notice, while Rachel. James paused. Rachel had her own distractions. Michael nodded slowly, the truth dawning on him. Depression had dimmed his senses and soul, making him susceptible. Rachel's emotional seclusion and subsequent treachery had exacerbated the trauma. However, he realized that he had not failed because he was not good enough. He'd been battling an unseen opponent all along. Michael felt clarity for the first time in years as a result of James' remarks. He was no longer ready to wallow in remorse or let Rachel's decisions shape his destiny. As he exited the pub that night, a plan started to form, a method to rebuild himself, recapture his happiness, and let go of the burden he had carried for far too long. It was not about vengeance or repairing the past. It was about taking one step forward at a time. Amanda Collins peered out the aircraft window as the skyline of Miami faded into the clouds. The guy next to her, with his chiseled jaw and confident demeanor, should have made her excited. However, as the jet soared, the adrenaline of departure filled her with emptiness rather than butterflies. Miami had promised her everything, a frenzy of luxury and pleasure. Nathan had spared no cost, including their enormous room overlooking the city, extravagant meals, spectacular entertainment, and countless praises. She had drank up his full attention, savoring the idea of being cherished. The evenings were a flurry of desire, leaving her body weary and bruised. However, rather than feeling fulfilled, she felt empty, as if a dazzling veneer had been torn naked. The first day felt like nirvana. She could still remember the moment they walked into their apartment, the sparkling vision of the city stretching out before them like a dream. She had rushed herself into Nathan's arms, their clothing abandoned in a desperate hurry before the bellboy had even closed the door. From then, it was all about decadence, swimming, shopping, great eating, and dancing. However, when they returned to the apartment that night, fractures started to appear. Nathan had kissed her hungrily in the elevator, urging that she should take a lengthy shower and make herself appealing to him. She had laughed, inebriated on his attention, and fled to the restroom, her body smelling of perfume. When she walked out, she anticipated to see something exquisite waiting for her, like a silk negligee or a pair of gorgeous underwear. Instead, on the bed were cheap fishnet stockings and outrageously high red platform heels. Her enthusiasm faded, but she attempted to laugh it off by shouting for Nathan. There was no response. "Nathan," she called again, hesitantly pulling the stockings up her legs. She tottered clumsily in her heels, feeling silly. The door of the suite flung open, and the guy who stepped inside was not Nathan. He was a behemoth in a clean blue suit, accompanied by two equally dressed guys. Rachel's stomach dropped. "Wrong room," she murmured with a terrified squeak. "You got the incorrect room. Please leave." The guys did not stop. They laughed, low and predatory. "Nathan!" Rachel yelled, despair seeping into her voice. But the guys just laughed harder. What followed was a night she couldn't quite put together. Flashes of anguish, shame, and dread stayed in her mind like shards of shattered glass. When she eventually awoke, the sun was shining through the windows and the clock showed almost noon. Her body felt like a battleground, with bruises and bites all over her flesh, and the blanket stuck to her in moist, sticky spots. As she stumbled into the bathroom, she saw her image in the mirror and moaned. Mascara streamed over her cheeks, and her lipstick smudged and smeared. White powder coated her nose, leaving traces of a drug she couldn't recall consuming. The shower jet pounded her tired body, the hot water removing some of her physical fatigue but not her guilt. When the steam had dispersed, she examined herself again. The bites and bruises were obvious, and even the plush bathrobe felt harsh on her skin. She returned to the room to find a new breakfast tray waiting for her. The dinner was still warm, so it must have arrived while she was in the shower. She sat down, starving, halfway through her scrambled eggs, when the room door opened again. Her heart fell. Nathan entered the room sporting an impeccable Armani suit and his signature arrogant look. Before Rachel could respond, he seized her shoulders from behind and suffocated her. She pulled away, her tone fierce and furious. "Take your hands off me," she yelled, her face a mixture of rage and embarrassment. Nathan laughed, ducking the spoon she threw at him. "Relax, honey," he murmured nonchalantly, as if her wrath was overblown. Rachel's voice raised, shaking with anger. "Relax? Did you leave me with those monsters? What the heck is wrong with you? I've never felt more humiliated in my life." He grabbed her flailing arms and pinned them to her sides, his face only inches from hers. His tone was filled with mockery. "Humiliated? Really, Rachel? You're a better actor than I expected. If you didn't enjoy every moment of it, you should have won an Oscar." Nathan moved back, unaffected, after violently releasing her. Rachel sank in a chair, her damp hair sticking to her cheeks. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Tape?" Nathan grinned, taking a sausage from her breakfast tray. "Oh sure, you are the star, honey. And the greatest part. It's simply the first episode of 3. Rachel sat opposite Nathan on the flight back from Miami, her huge sunglasses barely disguising the dark bags under her eyes. Her head hammered, the headache tightening around her temples like a vice. "I thought you cared about me," she said, her voice heavy with tiredness and bitterness. Nathan glanced up from his magazine, smiling as if she had told a joke. "Who? Me?" he inquired, his tone tinged with insincerity. Rachel's eyes overflowed with tears. He touched her arm, pretending concern. "Of course I care, honey. You have no clue how much money you earned me this weekend." Rachel shifted her gaze to the window, her quiet tears shaking her shoulders. The revelation struck her like a freight train. She had just been a pawn in his game. She had decades of life experience but hadn't learned anything since she was a youngster. Nathan hadn't allowed her to leave the suite after the first night. He scheduled a massage for her ravaged body and had room service deliver dinner. He also pushed tablets into her palm, forcing her to drink them without hesitation. Then he dressed her like a doll in a cheap vinyl suit and outrageously high platform heels. He sent her back to the toilet to make sure her reflection matched his fantasy. The second night was worse, with 5 males this time. 2 were overweight, 1 was her father's age, and she couldn't recall when she passed asleep. The next morning, she pleaded to go, even threatening herself, but Nathan merely laughed. Rachel was a shell of herself when they left Miami. She stumbled through the airport like an old lady, her huge sunglasses doing nothing to conceal her distress. "I hate you," she mumbled as they took their seats. "I know, honey," Nathan said with a dismissive grin. Meanwhile, Michael was shutting the book on his previous existence. The door of what had once been his house gently closed behind him. He slid the key into his pocket and went outside into the cool morning air. The day promised sunlight, an appropriate background for the shift he was about to embark on. The previous few days had been hectic, finalizing divorce documents, leaving from his employment of over 20 years, and packing up what little he chose to take with him. It had been both draining and liberating. He left behind a job he had dedicated himself to and a place that no longer felt like home. What remained was clarity, the type that comes with wiping the slate clear. That morning, he made one more trip around the vacant home. The familiar rooms were stripped of their personal touches. A few photographs were gone, and closets were half empty. However, the room seemed lighter, as if it, too, had been unburdened. In the kitchen, Michael put a big package atop Emily's kindergarten vase, which was deformed but treasured. The mail included divorce papers and his lawyer's business card. Rachel would discover it when she returned. It was all she needed to continue on without him. Michael stepped outdoors, his eyes drawn to the camper parked in the driveway, its silver exterior shining in the early light. Running his palm up its metal surface, he felt a surge of excitement. He climbed into the driver's seat, clutched the enormous steering wheel, and was taken back to boyhood, riding on his Uncle Robert's lap in a gigantic truck. He could almost hear his uncle's loud voice. "Come on, Michael, let's hit the road." He turned the key, and the camper's engine roared to life. He took a minute to gaze back at the home. The light was creating long shadows on the facade, and a little black and white cat jumped over the fence, returning from its nighttime travels. Michael grinned when the camper's wheels crunched on the gravel. "Let's hit the road," he said quietly, moving away and leaving the past behind. Michael's first destination was barely 30 miles away, at Emily's university campus. Emily could have remained at home and commuted, but she wanted to really experience college. Michael missed her when she departed, but he never said so. Rachel had urged her to attend, talking about independence and freedom, but Michael had no idea Rachel was pushing for her own freedom. He stopped into a little cafe just off campus, the red and white awning blowing in the early wind. It was early, which was ideal since it allowed him to spend time with Emily before her first lesson. Through the window, he saw her sitting at a table, the sunshine hitting the blue of her eyes and pleasant grin. Everything about the day seemed new, as if he were experiencing the world through new eyes. They hugged firmly before sitting down. "Are you really doing this?" Emily inquired, her look both astonished and amused. Michael smiled. "Let an old man chase a boyhood dream, darling." Emily laughed. "I'll allow as many as you can dream up." They ordered brunch, and the aroma of coffee and bacon filled the air. Their talk shifted to good recollections and hilarious anecdotes, avoiding the topic of Rachel. Time passed too swiftly. Michael looked at his watch and stretched across the table to touch Emily's hand. "And before I go," he told me, "I need 3 promises from you." "3?" she teased. "Is that all?" "3, he reiterated. "First," he replied, "I want you to be as happy as you possibly can." Her fingers squeezed around his. "That's an easy one," she said softly, her eyes gleaming. "Promise me," he said. She leaned forward to kiss his cheek. "Promise," she said quietly. "Second," Michael added. "Speak with Rachel when she calls. Give her the opportunity." The warmth in her face faded. "Daddy." "Promise me," he insisted, his grasp strong. A lengthy hush ensued. Then Emily offered a hesitant nod. "Promise, but only if she tells the truth." Michael scrutinized her face before nodding. "Fair enough," he said. "Third." He took a glossy quarter out of his pocket and held it up. "I want you to flip the coin. Heads, I go east, tails, I go west." Emily chuckled, and the tension between them eased for a time. She snatched the coin and tossed it high into the air, the silver sparkling as it caught light. When it landed, she smacked it on her palm to announce the outcome. "Tails," she said, smiling. Michael arose and embraced her fiercely. They went out to the parking lot together, and Emily gasped when she saw the trailer. "Wow, Dad. It is big." He showed her around, and her adoration grew with every detail. He gave her a scrap of paper as they parted ways. "This is my new number," he said. "Nobody else has it. It's just for you." She placed the paper in her bag. "I promise," she said, and they embraced again, both weeping. Michael got into the driver's seat, and as he drove away, he saw her wave in the side mirror. Her figure shrank with every mile. Rachel returned home to see a single key sparkling on the crimson doormat. She anticipated to push the door open against a stack of mail and papers, but there was none. She picked up the key and went inside, only to be stunned by the quiet. Something felt odd. She walked into the living room and spotted a blank area on the wall above the sofa. Michael and Emily's snapshot from their years ago vacation to Universal Studios was gone. She frowned. Who had stolen it? Everything else seems unaffected. In the kitchen, an envelope was pushed up against a vase Emily had created in elementary school, a flawed but treasured item. Michael wrote the sole word Rachel on the front in his own calligraphy. Her heart squeezed as she looked at it, refusing to reach for it just yet. Ryan had vanished after arriving earlier that day, leaving her to retrieve her things on her own. She barely had enough money to get a taxi home. Now, seated at the kitchen table, the tiredness and humiliation of the last few days overtook her. Her shaking fingers hesitated over the envelope till she lifted it up. "Congratulations, Rachel," she said cruelly, tears flowing down her cheeks. "Well done," her voice reverberated hollowly across the empty room. She broke down, crying into her hands. The divorce was concluded without Michael's presence. He had opted not to attend, allowing his lawyer to manage the proceedings. Rachel, sitting alone in court, attempted to argue her case, stating that she wanted to reunite, but Michael had already made his choice. His terms were more than reasonable. Rachel would retain the home and get a significant cash settlement. Despite Rachel's efforts to stall, the judge saw no need to postpone the case and ended it quickly. While Rachel sat in court, her face a mask of anguish, Michael was parked by a peaceful lake miles away. He sat in his camper with a hot cup of coffee and watched the sunshine dance on. For the first time in years, he felt liberated not only from the burden of his marriage, but also from the shadows that had hung over his life for so long. As cool autumn breezes blew through the trees, Michael's anguish faded into a bittersweet serenity. He had done all he could to terminate his marriage with dignity, despite the pain of betrayal. Meanwhile, Ryan's hubris proved to be his downfall, serving as a sharp lesson of the dangers of offending the wrong people. His downfall started when he chased a married lady who was completely committed to her husband. Outraged by the affair, the spouse hired a reputed fixer known for doing dirty work. Days later, Ryan was found in a shallow grave outside the city, the casualty of his own foolish actions. Rachel ultimately learned of Ryan's horrific death, which added to the stress in her already disintegrating life. Unaware of Ryan's demise, Michael took refuge on the road, traveling mile after mile. The weight of the past started to lessen, but the treachery persisted. So did a spark of optimism. His camper became a safe haven, a moving symbol of resilience, where he could reconstruct his life, free of the facades and machinations that had previously trapped him. Rachel, meanwhile, sat in her darkened room, looking at the empty glass next to her bed. Another restless night weighed on her as angry words echoed in her head. "You're only good for one thing." The guy who said it grinned as he buttoned his shirt and strode out without thinking twice. She suppressed the tears that threatened to come, resolved not to weep again. She told herself that she could start afresh. Dating apps, seductive discussions, and late nights out were intended to be a new beginning, but they seemed more like a succession of hollow experiences, leaving her empty than before. Each guy was the same, attractive over cocktails, compassionate in the moment, and full of whispered promises that faded by daylight. When the bed got cold, so did their attention, leaving Rachel with just guilt and hazy recollections. She told herself that was all right, this was how contemporary dating worked. But deep inside, it wasn't okay. She wanted more, something genuine, something she had previously rejected. Rachel's gaze lingered on a framed portrait on top of her dresser as she slept in the dark. It was a photo of her and Michael taken years ago on a mountain retreat. She could almost hear his laughing and felt the constant warmth of his presence. He had been faithful, trustworthy, and kind, traits she had not fully appreciated until they were gone. Now, the guys she encountered hardly seemed to care. To them, she was just a short sensation, with her name buried in their phones like an afterthought. The knowledge made her stomach churn. Rachel felt genuine loneliness for the first time in years, not because she was single, but because she knew she had lost something she could never get. As she lay in the darkness, a horrible realization dawned upon her. She had sacrificed true love for brief thrill, and now all she had was an empty bed and a sad heart. Thank you for watching. Do you believe relationships can endure betrayal? Please let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell for more. See you next time.